When Elvis's sound system broke down in the middle of a concert, thousands of fans were about to face crushing disappointment. But what 8-year-old Jake would accomplish in that moment would not only save the concert, but make him an instant legend. The Memphis Coliseum buzzed with electric anticipation on that sweltering August evening in 1975. 22,000 devoted fans had packed every seat, aisle, and standing space available, creating a sea of eager faces all turned toward the stage where their idol would soon appear. The air was thick with excitement, and the sweet scent of cotton candy mixed with the musky aroma of thousands of people gathered in one place. The venue itself was a testament to musical history. Built in the early 1960s, the Memphis Coliseum had hosted some of the greatest names in entertainment, but tonight felt different. There was an electricity in the air that seemed to charge every conversation, every laugh, every whispered prediction about what Elvis might perform. Fans had traveled from across the country, some camping outside for days to secure the best possible seats. License plates in the parking lot told stories of devotion. Cars from Texas, California, New York, and everywhere in between, all drawn by the magnetic pull of seeing the king perform in his hometown. The building's acoustics were legendary among sound engineers, a perfect blend of architectural design and technical innovation that could make even a whisper carry to the back row with crystal clarity. The curved ceiling and strategically placed sound baffles created an environment where music didn't just play. It enveloped the audience like a warm embrace. Tonight, that perfect acoustic environment would play a crucial role in what was about to unfold. Jake Morrison sat in the third row, his small 8-year-old frame barely visible between the towering adults around him. His father, Rick Morrison, worked as a sound engineer for the venue, and this rare treat of front-row seats was Jake's reward for good grades and helping his dad with equipment all summer. The boy's eyes sparkled with wonder as he took in the massive speakers, the intricate lighting rigs, and the complex web of cables that snaked across the stage like electronic veins. Rick had been working at the Memphis Coliseum for over a decade, building a reputation as one of the most reliable sound engineers in the business. He had worked with country legends, rock stars, and gospel singers, but Elvis Presley concerts were always special. The technical requirements were more complex, the stakes higher, and the audience more passionate than any other show. Tonight's setup had taken 3 full days to complete, with Rick personally checking every connection, every amplifier setting, and every backup system. Jake had been present for much of that preparation, his curiosity about the technical side of music performance growing with each passing day. While other fathers might take their sons fishing or to baseball games, Rick shared his passion for the intricate world of professional audio engineering. The boy had absorbed knowledge like a sponge, asking questions that sometimes surprised even seasoned professionals with their insight and technical understanding. Unlike other children his age who might have been overwhelmed by the technical complexity, Jake found himself fascinated by every wire, every connection, every piece of equipment. He had spent countless hours in his father's workshop, learning about amplifiers, mixing boards, and the delicate balance required to create perfect sound. While his peers played with toy cars and action figures, Jake tinkered with old radios and built simple circuits from spare parts. His bedroom was a testament to this unusual passion for an 8-year-old. Instead of posters of cartoon characters or sports heroes, Jake's walls were covered with circuit diagrams, speaker specifications, and photographs of famous recording studios. His desk was cluttered with small electronic components, partially completed projects, and technical manuals that most adults would find challenging to understand. Rick had initially worried that his son son was missing out on a normal childhood, but Jake's enthusiasm was so genuine and his aptitude so remarkable that he eventually embraced his role as mentor and teacher. The other children at school found Jake's interests peculiar, sometimes teasing him about his weird hobbies, but Jake didn't mind. He found the logical precision of electronics comforting, the way every component had a specific function and every problem had a solution if you understood the principles involved. Mathematics came easily to him because he could visualize the abstract concepts through the concrete reality of electrical circuits and audio frequencies. The crowd's energy reached fever pitch as the lights dimmed and the familiar opening chords of Also Sprach Zarathustra filled the Coliseum. Elvis Presley emerged from behind the curtain, resplendent in his white jumpsuit adorned with golden eagles, his presence commanding instant reverence from every person in attendance. The roar was deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Elvis grabbed the microphone with his characteristic confidence, his voice smooth as silk as he greeted his Memphis hometown crowd. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Y'all ready for some music tonight?" The response was thunderous, a collective "yes" that could probably be heard for miles around the venue. The band launched into CC Rider, and for the first few minutes, everything was perfect. Elvis's voice soared over the instrumental accompaniment, his movements fluid and mesmerizing. The audience swayed and sang along, lost in the magic that only the king of rock and roll could create. Jake watched in awe, not just at Elvis's performance, but at how seamlessly all the technical elements worked together to create this spectacular show. But then, disaster struck. Midway through Love Me Tender, a sickening pop echoed through the speakers, followed by an electronic screech that made everyone wince and cover their ears. Elvis's microphone went silent first, then the guitars, then the keyboards, until finally even the drums were left hanging in an eerie acoustic void. The only sound in the massive Coliseum was the confused murmur of 22,000 people wondering what had happened. Elvis tapped his microphone, his professional smile never wavering, despite the obvious technical catastrophe unfolding before him. He gestured to the sound booth, where Jake could see several figures moving frantically around banks of equipment, their silhouettes illuminated by the glow of indicator lights and digital displays. "Looks like we got ourselves a little technical difficulty here, folks," Elvis announced, his voice barely carrying without amplification. "Y'all just bear with us for a minute while we sort this out." But minutes turned into 10 minutes, then 15. The crowd began to grow restless, their initial good humor slowly giving way to frustration and disappointment. Some people started leaving, convinced the concert was over. Others demanded refunds. The magical atmosphere that had filled the Coliseum just moments before was rapidly evaporating. The situation was becoming more tense by the minute. Venue security was dealing with increasingly agitated fans, some of whom had spent their life savings to attend this concert. Hotel managers were fielding calls from guests who had traveled from other states and were demanding explanations. The local media, initially present to cover another triumphant Elvis performance, were now documenting what appeared to be shaping up as a significant disappointment for thousands of devoted fans. Behind the scenes, the financial implications were staggering. The concert represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue, not just for Elvis and his organization, but for the venue, the local economy, and dozens of support businesses. A canceled show would mean refunding ticket sales, paying union crews for a full day's work without a performance, and dealing with the long-term reputation damage that could affect future bookings. The pressure on the technical crew was immense, made worse by the knowledge that every minute of delay was costing money and disappointing fans who had waited months or even years for this opportunity. Jake watched his father and the other sound engineers scramble desperately through their equipment. Rick Morrison's face was red with stress and exertion as he traced cables, tested connections, and consulted frantically with his colleagues. The main mixing board, a massive console worth more than most people's houses, had suffered what appeared to be a catastrophic system failure. Every channel was dead, every amplifier silent. The technical original crew was following established emergency protocols, working through a systematic checklist of potential failure points. They checked power supplies, tested backup systems, and even brought in emergency equipment from storage. Radio communications crackled between different areas of the venue as technicians coordinated their troubleshooting efforts. The sound booth looked like a command center during a crisis, with multiple people hunched over diagnostic equipment, their faces illuminated by the glow of oscilloscopes and signal analyzers. Rick Morrison felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like a physical force. This was his venue, his equipment, his reputation on the line. He had worked on thousands of shows over his career, but had never faced a complete system failure of this magnitude during a performance. The irony wasn't lost on him that all the backup systems and redundant equipment he had insisted on installing over the years seemed to be failing simultaneously, as if the entire sound system had been struck by some kind of electronic plague. From his vantage point in the third row, Jake could see something the adults couldn't. His young eyes, trained by hours of helping his father with repairs, spotted a detail that the stressed and overwhelmed professional engineers had missed in their panic. Near the base of the stage, partially hidden by decorative skirting, he noticed a critical power junction box. One of the main cables feeding into it had worked loose, not completely disconnected, but loose enough to create an intermittent connection that would eventually fail entirely. The 8-year-old knew that the loose connection was causing power fluctuations throughout the entire sound system. Every time the cable moved even slightly, it would momentarily break contact, sending electrical spikes through the delicate equipment and eventually causing the protective circuits to shut down the entire system. Jake's understanding of the problem was remarkably sophisticated for someone his age. He had learned from his father that modern audio equipment contained numerous safety features designed to protect expensive components from electrical damage. These protective circuits were incredibly sensitive, capable of detecting even minor irregularities in power supply and automatically shutting down systems to prevent catastrophic failures. What appeared to be a complex malfunction was actually the equipment doing exactly what it was designed to do, protecting itself from an unstable power source. The irony was that the very safety features designed to prevent equipment damage were now preventing the show from continuing. Each time the loose connection briefly restored proper power, the protective circuits would begin their restart sequence, but before the process could complete, the intermittent connection would fail again, triggering another shutdown cycle. It was a perfect example of how sophisticated systems could be defeated by the most basic infrastructure problems. Jake tugged on his father's pants leg, but Rick was too focused on the mixing board to pay attention. "Not now, Jake," he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead as he continued his desperate troubleshooting efforts. But Jake persisted. He had learned enough from his father to understand that sometimes the most complex problems had surprisingly simple solutions. While all the adults were focused on the sophisticated electronic components, they were overlooking the basic infrastructure that made everything else possible. The boy made a decision that would change everything. Without asking permission, he slipped away from his seat and made his way toward the stage. His small size allowed him to move through the crowd and security barriers almost unnoticed. By the time anyone realized what was happening, Jake had already reached the junction box he had spotted from his seat. The cable was exactly as he had suspected, loose, but not completely disconnected. It was the kind of problem that could drive professional engineers crazy for hours, because it would seem to work intermittently, making diagnosis nearly impossible under pressure. But for Jake, who had helped his father fix dozens of similar problems in their home workshop, it was obvious. Using the small flashlight on his keychain, a gift from his father who had taught him that every good technician always carried a light, Jake examined the connection more closely. The cable had worked partially loose from its housing, creating just enough gap to cause problems, but not enough to be immediately obvious. Security guards were already moving toward him, but Jake acted quickly. He pressed the cable firmly back into its proper position and heard the satisfying click that indicated a secure connection. Immediately, the indicator lights on nearby equipment began to glow steady instead of flickering erratically. "Hey, kid, you can't be back here," one of the security guards called out, but his voice was drowned out by the sudden return of sound from the stage. Elvis's microphone crackled to life, followed by the instruments, as the entire sound system came back online with perfect clarity. The crowd erupted in amazement and relief. Elvis himself looked stunned for a moment before breaking into one of his famous grins. "Well, I'll be," he said into the now working microphone. "Looks like our little friend here just saved the show." All eyes turned to Jake, who was standing beside the junction box looking both proud and slightly embarrassed by the sudden attention. The security guards, who had been about to escort him away, now looked at him with a mixture of confusion and respect. Rick Morrison appeared at his son's side, having fought his way through the crowd when he realized what had happened. His face showed a complex mix of emotions: pride, amazement, and a touch of concern at his 8-year-old's bold initiative. "Jake, what did you do?" he asked, though the answer was becoming clear as other technicians confirmed that the sound system was now functioning perfectly. "The power cable was loose, Dad," Jake explained matter-of-factly. "I could see it from our seats. It was making the connection flutter, so the protection circuits were shutting everything down to prevent damage." The simplicity of his explanation belied the sophistication of his diagnosis. Professional sound engineers with decades of experience had been stumped by the problem, yet an 8-year-old had identified and solved it in minutes. Elvis, who had been listening to this exchange through his restored microphone, walked to the edge of the stage and knelt down to Jake's eye level. "Son, what's your name?" the king asked, his voice carrying clearly through the now perfect sound system. "Jake Morrison, sir," the boy replied, his voice small but steady despite the attention of 22,000 people focused entirely on him. "Well, Jake Morrison," Elvis said with genuine warmth, "I think you just earned yourself a place in rock and roll history. How would you like to watch the rest of this show from right here on stage with me?" The crowd's roar of approval was deafening. Jake looked to his father, who nodded with tears of pride in his eyes. In that moment, a shy 8-year-old with a gift for electronics became the hero of one of Elvis Presley's most memorable concerts. As Jake was helped up onto the stage, Elvis put an arm around his small shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen," the king announced to his audience, "let's hear it for Jake Morrison, the youngest sound engineer in Memphis." The applause was thunderous, but what happened next would become the stuff of legend. Elvis began telling the crowd about how sometimes the most important solutions come from the most unexpected places, and how Jake's quick thinking and courage had saved not just the concert, but possibly the expensive sound equipment as well. "You know," Elvis continued, his voice carrying the warmth that had made him beloved by millions, "this young man here just taught all of us something important. Sometimes when us adults are making things complicated, it takes a kid to see what's really going on." Jake stood beside Elvis, overwhelmed by the situation but trying to process everything that was happening. The stage lights were brighter than he had imagined, and the crowd looked like an ocean of faces stretching back as far as he could see. But more than anything, he was fascinated by being so close to all the equipment that made the magic possible. Elvis noticed Jake's continued interest in the technical aspects of the show. "You really like all this electronic stuff, don't you, son?" he asked during a brief pause between songs. Jake nodded enthusiastically. "My dad teaches me about circuits and amplifiers and stuff. I want to be a sound engineer when I grow up, just like him." "Well," Elvis said with a smile, "I'd say you're off to a pretty good start." For the rest of the concert, Jake remained on stage, sometimes sitting on an equipment case, sometimes standing beside Elvis as the king performed his greatest hits. The crowd loved having the young hero visible throughout the show, and Elvis made sure to include Jake in the experience, occasionally asking him about the equipment or making jokes about having the world's youngest technical consultant. The incident became more than just a concert story. It became a lesson about paying attention to details, having the courage to act when you see a problem, and how age doesn't always determine expertise. Jake's quick thinking had prevented what could have been a disaster for both Elvis and the thousands of fans who had paid to see him perform. As the concert neared its end, Elvis made a special announcement. "Before we finish tonight, I want to do something special for our young friend Jake here. Son, "Son, would you like to help me with the final song?" Jake looked uncertain, but Elvis explained that all he needed to do was help with a simple technical task, operating one of the stage lights during "Can't Help Falling in Love." It was a small role, but it made Jake feel like an integral part of the performance. As Elvis sang his closing song, with Jake carefully operating the spotlight as instructed, the entire Coliseum was filled with a sense of magic that went beyond just the music. It was a moment of connection between generations, between professional expertise and youthful intuition, between star and fan. When the final notes faded away, Elvis turned to Jake one more time. "Jake Morrison, you've got a bright future ahead of you, son. Don't ever stop paying attention to the details, and don't ever be afraid to speak up when you know you can help." The crowd gave Jake his own standing ovation as Elvis's father came to collect him from the stage. Rick Morrison was beaming with pride as he hugged his son, understanding that this night would be a story Jake would tell for the rest of his life. As they made their way backstage, Elvis pulled Rick aside. "Your boy's got real talent," he said seriously. "He's got the eye for this work, and more importantly, he's got the courage to act on what he sees. That's rarer than you might think." Rick nodded, still somewhat in shock at how the evening had unfolded. "He's always been interested in electronics, but I never imagined sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal what someone's really capable of," Elvis observed. "Tonight, your son showed 22,000 people that heroes come in all sizes." Elvis paused for a moment, his expression becoming more thoughtful. "You know, Rick, I've been performing for 20 years now, and I've seen all kinds of technical problems. Equipment failures, power outages, instrument malfunctions, you name it. But I've never seen someone so young diagnose a problem that quickly and have the confidence to act on it. That boy of yours has something special." The conversation was interrupted by Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, who had been dealing with the venue management about the near disaster. "Elvis, we need to discuss the implications of what happened tonight. The media is already calling it the miracle concert. This could be great publicity if we handle it right." Elvis held up a hand. "Colonel, the only publicity I'm interested in tonight is making sure everyone knows about Jake Morrison. That boy saved this show, and I want the whole world to know it." The story of Jake Morrison and the night he saved Elvis's concert spread far beyond Memphis. Newspapers picked up the tale, radio DJs told it on air, and it became one of those heartwarming stories that people love to share. For Jake, it was the beginning of a lifetime fascination with sound engineering that would eventually lead to a successful career in the music industry. Within days of the concert, Jake found himself the subject of local and then national attention. The Memphis Commercial Appeal ran a front-page story with the headline, "8-Year-Old Hero Saves Elvis Concert," complete with photographs of Jake on stage with the king. Television news programs picked up the story, and suddenly the Morrison family's phone was ringing constantly with interview requests from journalists across the country. The attention was overwhelming for a shy 8-year-old who had simply done what came naturally to him. Jake didn't understand why fixing a loose cable was such a big deal. To him, it was just basic problem solving. But the adults around him understood the broader significance. In an age when technology was becoming increasingly complex and intimidating to many people, a child had demonstrated that sometimes the simplest solutions were still the most effective. Letters began arriving at the Morrison household from around the world. Other children wrote to Jake, inspired by his story to pursue their own interests in science and technology. Professional engineers sent congratulatory notes, some offering internships or mentorship opportunities for when Jake got older. The story had struck a chord with people who believed that age should never be a barrier to making a difference. Years later, when Jake had become a respected sound engineer in his own right, he would often tell young technicians about that night in Memphis. He would explain how the most sophisticated problems sometimes have simple solutions, and how having the courage to act on your observations can make all the difference. But most importantly, he would tell them about how Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, took time in the middle of a crisis to make an 8-year-old boy feel like a hero. It was a lesson in grace, kindness, and the importance of recognizing talent and courage wherever whatever it might appear. The technical problem that night had lasted less than 20 minutes, but the impact of Jake's solution resonated for decades. It became a reminder that expertise isn't always about age or credentials. Sometimes it's about paying attention, thinking clearly, and having the courage to step forward when you know you can help. As for the loose cable that started it all, it became something of a legend among the sound crew at Memphis Coliseum. They made sure it was properly secured after that night, but they also made sure that every new technician hired heard the story of 8-year-old Jake Morrison, who proved that sometimes the biggest problems have the smallest solutions, and that heroes come in the most unexpected packages. The concert itself went down in Elvis history, not just for the technical difficulties, but for the way those difficulties led to one of the most heartwarming moments in rock and roll history. It showed Elvis at his most gracious and human, and it reminded everyone present that music is about bringing people together, solving problems as a community, and celebrating the unexpected talents that can emerge when we least expect them. For Jake, that night planted seeds that would grow throughout his life. He learned that technical knowledge combined with quick thinking could make a real difference. He learned that age was no barrier to making meaningful contributions. And most importantly, he learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply pay attention to what's happening around you and have the courage to act when you see an opportunity to help. The story became a testament to the power of observation, the importance of basic technical knowledge, and the magic that can happen when someone has the courage to step forward in a moment of crisis. It reminded everyone that heroism isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about noticing what others have missed and having the confidence to act on that knowledge. And somewhere in Memphis, in the archives of the Coliseum, there's still a photograph from that night. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, with his arm around 8-year-old Jake Morrison, both of them smiling at the camera after a night that proved that heroes really do come in all sizes. The photograph became iconic in its own right, reproduced in countless articles and books about Elvis Presley's career. It captured a moment that transcended the usual boundaries between performer and audience, adult and child, fame and anonymity. In the image, Elvis looks genuinely delighted, his famous smile authentic rather than performative, while Jake appears both proud and slightly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had accomplished. Years later, when digital technology began to transform the music industry, that photograph would take on additional significance. It represented a bridge between the analog era of Elvis's career and the digital future that Jake's generation would inherit. The loose cable that had caused so much trouble was itself a reminder that even in an age of increasing technological sophistication, the fundamentals of electrical connection and power distribution remained as critical as ever. The Memphis Coliseum eventually created a small display case near the entrance, featuring artifacts from that famous night, including the actual cable that Jake had fixed, carefully preserved and labeled as a reminder that sometimes the biggest problems have the smallest solutions. Visitors to the venue could see the simple piece of equipment that had nearly derailed one of Elvis Presley's most memorable performances and learn about the 8-year-old boy who had saved the day through observation, knowledge, and courage. The concert itself was recorded, though the initial audio dropout meant that the first few songs had to be reconstructed from audience recordings and alternate sources. But the moment when the sound system came back online was preserved in perfect clarity, capturing not just Elvis's relief and gratitude, but the explosive joy of 22,000 fans who had witnessed something truly special. That recording became one of the most sought-after bootlegs in Elvis collecting circles, not just for the music, but for the human story it contained. Year-old Jake Morrison, both of them smiling at the camera after a night that proved that heroes really do come in all sizes.